this quick tutorial, I want to show you kind of an answer to a question of what's going on with my GPU. You may have this scenario where perhaps Dogwaffle Howler 9 is not running with the GPU for some of the filters that should. Some of the filters or capabilities, brushes and other things. Some of it is using the GPU if possible. And so here's what you want to do to verify it. In fact, I want to not just show you where to verify it, but I want to show you how I created this this little illustration with those circles and arrows, pointers and so on, and also how I dimmed the background, made it a little bit blurry so as to better focus and bring forward the material in the front. So essentially I started from this picture, which I put together in Irfan View by copy pasting different snapshots. Of course I could have done that in Dogwaffle too, but I like Irfan View too, so I'll give credit to Irfan View when needed and when it deserves it, and it certainly does a lot. So essentially what you can do is click on the window menu, select settings, right there, click on window settings, and then you'll see the program settings, and there is a threading and GPU button there, and when you click that you'll see this dialog. All right, let's go do that. So in fact let me just clear the image here so we don't get too much distractions, and we'll talk about everything else in a second. So where is it? There, window and settings, and in the settings menu you can find threading and GPU. So this will tell you about your CPU and also GPU. The threading is how many cores do you have. These are logical cores. I have a i7 processor here, which is quad core, but also hyper-threading on each core, so it makes it ×2 for the logical cores. You got 8 there. And in fact, when you do Control-Shift-Escape, you can see under performance how many cores are there as well, or if you have some processes running at the particular time, you'll see how many of them are running. The display, the way it looks here varies a lot depending on which version of Windows you have. XP will certainly not have the GPU running, but it may have, I think it may have multi-processing. Anyway, let's go back to this. So we have the threading in the upper part of this dialog, and the GPU down on the bottom part here, and it is in my system enabled by default. So the key thing to see is whether the GPU is supported. So when you see supported GPU equal true, that means that Dogwaffle has determined that the features on your system have enough GPU support that it can use it. Not every GPU is created equal, and there are some older versions that may not have what we're looking for. So unfortunately, if it's not adequate, if it's either on an older version of Windows that doesn't support the GPU, or if the GPU itself doesn't have the necessary capabilities, this will be disabled. The only option you do have is if it can use it and it enables it by default, you can actually disable that. And that's something you can do if for instance, well, it turns out it's really there, but it's not solid enough or reliable enough, and so you might be better off disabling it. And then sometimes also because for some reason the performance is actually not benefiting it, and it may not make it faster. So there is a little a benchmark here that you can run, and that benchmark will compute, will do some number crunching, will compute a so-called Mandelbrot fractal image, and it will do that 100 times on the CPU and then also on the GPU, and then it will calculate the difference in time or the fractions. And so when you do this, now right now I'm doing it without the screen refresh, so you don't really see any updates behind it. But It then, after it's done that, it's calculating, it's showing how long it took to do it on the GPU, how long it took to do it on the CPU first. This one was 6.4 seconds. This one was 0.7 seconds on the GPU, so significantly faster. It's like a fraction. We call it difference here, but it's really kind of a fraction. This is a fraction of the CPU divided by GPU. So it ends up being, or the other way around maybe, and it ends up being about 8 times faster in this case, I guess, 8 or 9 times faster. And there you go. Yeah, actually, you see that right there, 8.2 times faster. Right. So in this case, that means it's certainly beneficial to use the GPU, even though the CPU itself is already pretty fast. You can get some stuff to run even faster on the GPU. That's perhaps a typical scenario, but it can be significantly better. You know, I have seen cases where it's like 20 times faster or more. And the GPU, you know, there are some GPUs that are the equivalent of 100 cores, 200 cores or more. So it is definitely possible if you have a high-end gaming machine, or you have a really good GPU, but actually on a fairly slow CPU, you may see some much higher differences there, even more benefits for using and keeping the GPU enabled. All right, so that's that. Now let me talk a little bit about how I did that illustration. Let me get out of this. And so this illustration, I'm talking about this circle and the arrows and that sort of things. How did I do that, right? So starting from this image, one thing I wanted to do first is to apply a selection mask to kind of blur the background. All right, let's disable this email. Let's go and select the particular areas of interest that I want to keep at full brightness, full intensity, and then the other parts, the background should be slightly blurred and dimmer, less contrasty. So here's what I'll do. First of all, I'll go to selection and make sure I'm in overlay alpha mode, because that will make it easier to see when I do a selection. Let me show you if I don't have it, and I'm using the rectangle to alpha. If I'm selecting something like this, all you see is the marching ants. Now you can see them, but it's a bit difficult to see if I use the shift key to select other parts. It gets a bit difficult to see exactly where it is all together. So what I did instead, or in addition to the marching ants, I don't mind keeping them, but the overlay alpha is really a good feature to have, because that will show you where the selection mask currently is. In this case, really nicely. All right, so the first thing I'll do is I'll select the selection on the window, like so. And then I'll use the shift key to keep adding to the selection. Because I mean, if I were to not use the shift key and just do the selection on this box now, it will highlight, it will select this box, but it will not add it to the prior selection. Whereas if I use the shift key, I can go and add to the selection with the left button, or remove from the selection with the right button. So if I had gone too far here, like so, I could actually use the right button with the shift key down to remove a chunk of that selection, something like this, right, to cut it out. Okay, so I have let me do that one more time. With the right button down, make this a little bit more narrow, something like so. Right, so now I have the window selected, I have this pull down menu selected. I want more, I want this side here. Just keep going with the left button. So shift and left button to keep adding to the selection. And here again, shift and left button to keep adding to the selection. There, so we now have our regions of interest, and the rest should not be, let me minimize these two. The rest should not be given as much visibility. It should be blurred. So I'm going to first need to store this, because we may need to get back to that. So there is a store alpha, and that's what you see here. Right? That's what I actually had done earlier, but it's inverted here. So the thing you can do next is say, well, I don't need to work with the selected parts. I actually want to work right now with the non-selected parts on the outside of it. So you can do that. If you have it stored, you can invert it here, but that's inverting it in the stored copy, Now you need to replace it in here. So click on replace, and now it's basically inverted it there. Another way to do that is to actually do the inversion directly on that current selection right here. That's the vertical bar that will select, that will invert it on the active selection mask, as opposed to this stored copy here. All right, so let's minimize this. Now that we have the background selected and the foreground items protected, what we can do is blur this. Right. So for instance, one thing I would do is go to the filter, blur, and Gaussian blur comes to mind. Bokeh blur works pretty nicely here too. Let's give it a little bit less. You know, one thing you can do is get a combination of both too much blur and not too much. What you do is you kind of go to the fairly intense blur level, and then you use the interactive undo, which you can find under filter right here, fade last action. That's the same as the interactive undo. Or you can see it here in the little green icon, interactive undo. Click on that, and then you can go back to where it was before. So here is on the right side is where it is now with the blur applied. On the left side, the slider, it's where that's before. All right, after, before, and after, and you can go anywhere in between. So it kind of blends the two images together to some percentage amount. So you could have still a little bit of that crisp text showing through, just very little. All right, something like this. All right, let's click on the top here to dismiss the slider. So now we have this blurred. We still want to perhaps make it dimmer. So filter again, and this time perhaps the value or the hue saturation value. Let's go to the value. I like that one, and reduce the contrast. Right, you can increase the contrast or you can reduce it, and if you reduce it, that will give it a little bit more of a grayish tone. You can still go and do that one more time with the filter, adjust value, reset the parameters we currently have, and even reduce the brightness or the value, or both. You know, so you can really make this blurry and darker and less contrasty as you need. And now, if you clear the selection mask, let's go selection clear or Control D, you now have to focus on the crisp parts that remain because they were protected from the filters and from the blurring and all that stuff. And so now we have what we really want to focus on. Now, the next part is adding, let me see what we had as the next part here. Okay, that's the mask. I'm not going to need this one anymore. I'm going to delete that. But we had one more, and that's this one here. We had those arrows. All right, so how did we do that? Let me start from here and show you these arrows and also the circle. First, I did the circle. So I went to the oval tool here, and instead of using the current brush, which is the natural media lines, because that could be something like a soft brush. Let me undo that. Perhaps increase the size. You know, that could be the soft feathered edges. You can see here it's got a little bit of a aliasing or a soft transition, and that's because it's the airbrush by default. That's my current brush. If you don't want that current brush to intervene here or to interfere with it, what you can use the graphical lines. Click on this icon here, and this will allow you to get the graphical lines very crisp and more predictable. But this one, these ones are bigger, so we're going to need to reduce the size. Undo that and reduce the size here to something a little bit more reasonable. That's good. All right, and all you need to do is select the middle, the center of the area around which you want to draw the circle, right, or the oval, and then go something like this. Now, if that's still too big, let's just undo that one more time, make it a little bit smaller. There you go, and then draw it around here. Okay, so we've got that circle around here. Now we need to show a pointer, or like a line going from that circle or oval down to this area. I mean, we could also do another one here. Right, that really is whichever way you like to show those illustrations with pointers going from one area to another. I'm going to, in fact, for this one, I'm going to keep it. And now I'm going to go to the line, the linear tool, single line, right? And I'm still in the graphical lines mode. And what I'm doing is the cap at the start is going to be flat, but the end is going to be the arrow anchor. So we have an anchor that looks like an arrow. You see that? this end here looks like an arrow. Let's go do an undo, and now so grab it somewhere around, start from somewhere in the orange line and then go in here and point it at the next one. Let me go and undo that and zoom in a little bit. It'll be easier to see. So something like this. I want the arrow to start somewhere here, right, and go like this. I don't have to necessarily go right into it. I can go like this. That's good enough. All right, and then we have perhaps the next one that would go over here. And let's say we want to go back to the oval. Click the oval, and remember this is a double switch. You can be in the lower right corner for the fill mode, in which case it would fill it with this blue color, because that's the blue color here. Or you can click it on the non-filled mode, and that way it will be the hollow, just like we had before here. And so now we've got the oval, and we can go back to the linear mode and draw it from here and put it right there, right? Something like this, so it stays visible quite nicely. And then we've got one more, and perhaps this one we won't use an oval for this. We'll just go like so, or perhaps we'll go point straight at the GPU right there. And that's just an idea of how you can, perhaps if you're an instructional designer or a technical trainer and you want to have a snapshot of some sort of software or whatever graphic you've put together, screen capture, you want to do some illustrations. There are some nice capabilities to make some beautiful arrows and other types of lines that link together that you may have seen. That's new in version 9. 9.1 definitely has that, and you can also add style. There's a solid line, there is a dash mode, you see it like this. You can have it filled, line fill, so it gets a blue on the inside or whatever color you set here, maybe a dark green, right? And now you have sort of a different appearance for that dashed line. And so lots of other fun stuff to do with that. Great for illustration and for tagging and marking up some images. All right, so that's how that was done, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another tutorial anytime soon.